My name is Dave McKay, and on this episode of the program, we are specifically going to talk to you about how to use the draft cheat sheet guide from FantasyKnuckleheads.com, how to integrate the program and everything that you're learning in this series with the cheat sheet and the fantasy draft guide guidelines and program from FantasyKnuckleheads.com, with whom we are partnered on this program. So, want to thank the guys over there for working with us on this, and I think we've got some really great insight. And the tool that you get from the subscription to the FantasyKnuckleheads.com website, the members-only area, is fantastic in and of itself. The forums are great. The kind of feedback and the different breakdowns that you get in that on that website are fantastic. But the most important part of it is this draft guide that you can develop that is customized to your league, specifically designed, specifically tailored to the settings, the scoring settings, the positional settings, what your roster breakdown looks like, how your scoring is assigned. It even has specific parts in there for bonus points and for the number of points per touchdown, number of points per yards, etc. So it's a great tool for you. What it does is it takes the settings that you input, and it'll spit out a spreadsheet for you. You can download it to a spreadsheet, or it'll even show it right there on your computer screen. It'll spit out rankings for you, but not just rankings. It will split it out and give you multiple columns that really help you identify. Take some of the most difficult parts out of your drafting process, help you identify where the really true values are. So it takes a lot of what we're talking about in the program and simplifies it for you and dovetails perfectly with what we do here on the program. So a lot of what we're talking about on the program, in our 100 level, we talked about kind of the no-brainer process. We talked about in our draft prep, the 3P3Z program. You can use these sorts of things to simplify and scale down what the information that you get out of the FantasyKnuckleheads.com draft guide. But they work perfectly together, and it's something that you can use in conjunction with one another. So let's talk about the draft guide a little bit and what it is, what it isn't, and how it can help you. The columns, it gives you it doesn't give you the statistics, but it will tell you the points projected for that player based on your scoring system, and it will tell you additional information. Most specifically, it will give you a ranking and a value for that player. And what the value is it's based off of value-based drafting mentality of taking the average of the starters at that position and then comparing an individual player versus the average of the starters at that position. So, for example, you might have the best quarterback might be a plus 100 type player, and that means that player is going to gain, if projections are accurate across the board, that particular player will get 100 points more over the course of the season than the average quarterback in that league. So you've got, say, a 12-team league, you've got 12 quarterbacks. I personally do it a little bit, I make it a little bit deeper on that when I'm talking about my roster ladder process, which is a deeper version of value-based drafting. We'll get into that in another episode, but just to work with the Fantasy Knuckleheads program, you are identifying the average, so 12 quarterbacks, or the average, the top running backs, the top wide receivers, the top tight ends, the average of the starters at those positions in your league, and then it will identify the number of points. And then we'll give you a listing of the valuation for those players. So it's invaluable. So additionally, it will give you an average draft position, and that pulls the current live draft data out of ESPN.com's draft data that's live on their site. That's fantastic information to have. You can have an idea of where a player is being valued in a series of drafts in recent days. So you can identify where a player is likely to go in your draft based on average draft position. You can look at the value. That's what we just talked about as far as the difference between the number of projected points a player is expected to produce versus your league average based on the point system and what you put in the number of player slots. So let's say, for example, that you had a 12-team league, and I'll just break this down into a little more detail for you. 12-team league, 3 wide receiver slots. A lot of times you see 2 plus a flex. A lot of leagues will have a 3 wide receiver system. So let's just say you had 3, and let's say that the number one or number 2 wide receiver was going to be a 245 point producer, and then the average is 175. So there's a differential there between the guy that you're looking at of 70 points. So that gives that player a value of 70. So he's projected to score 70 more points than the starting 36 wide receivers in that 3 wide receiver league for 12 teams. Right? So you get me on that? 36 starting wide receivers. The average is 175 points. The guy you're looking at is 245 points. So you're plus 70 on that particular player. So you know over the course of a season what your average benefit is going to be versus the average in that position. And it bears mentioning that as you get later in your draft, it doesn't take very long to get into the negatives. So that shows you the value of those top picks so much. But it also, it still bears mentioning that even if a guy's like negative 10 or negative 20, that just means they're below average for the starter. That doesn't mean they're not a valid starter. So what you can do is for these 36 wide receivers, you take a look at the top 36. You're probably going to have 17 or 18 that are above the line and with a positive value, and then you'll have 17 or 18 that have a negative value. So about half should have a positive value, about half should have a negative value. That may be skewed a little bit. You may actually have fewer if it's really top heavy and there's some really high producers on the top end. You may only have 13 or 12 that have a positive value, and maybe the rest 23, 24 might have a negative value. So don't let the negative value scare you when you see a negative value. What you might want to look at is what the break line is between number 36 and number 37. It might be negative 60 or negative 70 points, whatever the number is this year. And so that might be the number that you're targeting specifically, so that you can look at the differential, the breakdown between what can be acceptable as a starter in your league and what is kind of below the line. And beyond that, what you're really focusing on is the differential between the value of the person you're looking at to draft versus the value of the player at another position. So this is the biggest problem with drafting. The biggest problem with drafting is you get after you get past the first round or two, and maybe even in the first round or two, but especially when you get into rounds, say 3, 4, 5, you start looking at, you're like, wait, okay, so I took a quarterback and a running back in the first 2 rounds. That's great. I'm off to a good start. Now it's round 3, and should I take another running back? Or maybe I should get my first wide receiver. Wait, there's a stud tight end available. Maybe the best tight end still available in round 3. What do I do? How do I compare this stud tight end to maybe at that point in the 3rd round, you might be looking at the number 10 wide receiver and the number 16 running back or whatever it is. So I'm looking at tight end number 1, running back number 16, and wide receiver number 10. And how do I compare the value of those guys? I mean, a tight end's not going to get as many points possibly as a first-string wide receiver, a number 10 wide receiver, and number 16 running back. All right, you're already talking about an RB2. Well, do I grab them now or do I just wait? So the best way to handle that is to compare their relative values and go across the board, identify that. But then beyond that, you also want to look at average draft position, and there's also some other columns in the fantasyknuckleheads.com draft spreadsheet, draft preparation guide, which is fantastic. You've got next value, next ADP, and you've also got SOS, which stands for strength of schedule. So let's break those down. Next value is calculated in the same formula as value, but you can use it to identify the drop-off between players that in a player's value that you're looking at now versus the next available player at that position. So let's say you've got a wide receiver with a certain value, a value of 1, right? Maybe like a positive 1. And then you look at the next value, and you notice that the next value of the wide receiver is negative 28. So there's a drop-off of 29 points there, right? So you're comparing player A versus player B. It's 29-point differential. So then you can also look at the projected next available round column to see when that next value player is projected to be available. So you can look at the next ADP column, and that will help you quickly evaluate when that next value player should be available, or how far they're going to go in your draft, right? So then you can compare that to what you're seeing in other positions, in quarterback or running back or tight end, and see if there's a better point differential, and then combine that with how long you have to wait to gain that same differential, right? So it's all about gaining the best advantage you can in each round, but also being aware of your surroundings, being aware of the average draft position. So in other words, if in the wide receiver scenario you've got a positive 1 value and a negative 28 value, so it's a 29-point swing. That may not be as good as a 20-point swing on running backs, but you anticipate, because you're looking at next ADP, the running backs are going to go. There's going to be 4 or 5 running backs that are going to be taken before you draft again, but the next wide receiver might still be there. So you might take that running back now, get your plus 20 advantage instead of the 29-point advantage with the positive 1 wide receiver, and you know you can wait because you might still get that next wide receiver, and the difference when you combine the value of the 2 or the 3 when you're planning out your draft, the combination of values is where you really get your bump, right? So you could just kind of draw chalk, so to speak, and take the best value when it's time for you to draft. But I encourage you to look at next value, next ADP in the Fantasy Knuckleheads guide, and identify and plan out, kind of like a chess game, plan out a day or a round or two in advance, and take a look at what's available to you coming up, so that you can have a pretty good idea of, well, this value combines with this value better. I might get a plus 20 and another plus 20. That's better than a plus 29 and a plus 6, right? So because you're talking about, with those 2 picks, I'm getting a plus 40 value, as opposed to with those other 2 picks, a plus 29 and a plus 6, I'm only getting 35, right? So I come out at 5 points ahead with these 2 picks if I combine them, right? Instead of just going for the plus 29 now and worrying about the next round. You may be stuck with a plus 6 in the next round, and that's not as good. So you also have to pay attention to your roster makeup and what you need in your draft. So it's a very complex situation. This is an advanced strategy, but it's great what the Fantasy Knuckleheads guys have done. They've put together this cheat sheet for you that really identifies and really kind of takes a lot of the guesswork out of value-based drafting and adds additional things in there. Let's talk about strength of schedule for a second. So this is the projected strength of schedule based on the player's position. So number 1 or a lower number would be an easier strength of schedule. 32 would be the hardest. So it would go from 1 to 32, easiest to hardest, right? And so let's say you have a wide receiver. Just for simplicity, we'll talk about wide receivers on all these. Let's say we have a wide receiver with the number 1 ranked easiest fantasy football pass schedule. And that is going to be broken down because that player maybe faces a lot of poor pass defenses, but in addition, that wide receiver also has a very strong quarterback. So it combines those pieces into what you're looking at. So every draft is different, and that's the great thing about fantasy football. Every draft is different. It's hard to go into draft with kind of like our no-brainer system. That's intended to be a 101 level course to give you an idea of, like, if you're new to fantasy football, or you've just never really been able to get your brain around how it works, or you've never done enough research. That's a great kind of entry level. We identify what players to take in what rounds. But as we said in our 200 level and our graduate level episodes, you're going to have to start coloring outside the lines. You're going to have to start smudging up those borders between, well, should I take 3 running backs and 3 wide receivers in the first 6 rounds and then go back-to-back quarterbacks? That is an excellent strategy, very defensible strategy for people that don't want to get too complex. It takes a lot of ease, puts a lot of ease into your mind, takes a lot of the pressure off, right? And gives you confidence, and also helps you identify and focus on one position per round. But as you get better, as you get more capable in fantasy football, to become truly elite, you're going to need tools like what they have at FantasyKnuckleheads.com. You're going to have to use these tools to identify value-based drafting, where the best values are, and then above and beyond that, if you want to get truly elite, you start mapping out, like a chess player, what moves you're going to make and how these valuations are going to combine to give you the best valued roster in your entire league. And that's how you dominate your league, my friends. You don't dominate your league by just going to places and reading news about players and from guys that tell you that you'll crush the competition. Words are cheap, but research and statistics and really doing your homework, that's where the money's made. That's where you identify the true values, and that's where you win your fantasy leagues. So once again, thank you so much for joining up with us on the program. I encourage you to go over to Fantasy Knuckleheads and sign up for membership over there and get some of these spreadsheets, get this valuation stuff, so that you can do a better job of taking what your knowledge is from the program to the next level. And thank you so much for joining us once again on the program, and we'll see you next time right here on your master's degree in fantasy football, the program.